Good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to my medieval sewing party. I am the creative Contessa, and I am here working on a set of medieval underwear at one of the most beautiful Starbucks in the world, the Daegu Starbucks. Never guessed this is a Starbucks, huh? It's quite beautiful. And because I'm working on medieval underwear in preparation for Pennsic, I thought I would invite you in. I know I'm not wearing medieval clothes today. I apologize. I just came from a dentist appointment where I had a cleaning done. So, beautiful teeth. So I'm here at my favorite Starbucks, and normally it is empty here at this time because all of these people should be at dinner, but they're not somehow. So let me know if it's loud, in which case we'll just have to end the stream because I'm already settled in for a lovely cup of green tea and sewing. So format is, if you have any questions about medieval material culture, medieval history, medieval life, medieval clothing, medieval dance, medieval food, pop them in the comments and I will answer them. Otherwise, I will be working on a new smokka, as it was called in 15th century English. It is basically a linen underdress that is worn underneath of the garment called a kirtle, and I am working on finishing the seams. I machine sewed the seams because I am out of time, and so I am now in the process of finishing those seams by hand so that any stitches that are seen on the outside of the garment will be hand sewn stitches. And so you'll only see the machine sewn stitches if you turn my smock inside out, and no one should be doing that except for my damsels or moi. So yeah, so welcome. If you're enjoying this medieval sewing live stream, then don't forget to double tap that screen to like and subscribe. Okay, so let me just show you where we're at so far. So basically what I'm doing is I am felling the inside seams, which means I am folding the seam, which starts out looking like this. I am folding it over in half so that it completely envelops itself, and then I'm doing a blind stitch, which means that most of the stitching is buried inside of the fabric and protected, and then on the outside, you barely see anything but little tiny pricks of stitches going down the outside of the seam, right? And so that's going to protect the seams on the inside so that when they are laundered, because this garment has the hell laundered out of it. So when it gets laundered, those seams are protected. So that is where we are at on this garment. So basically I have a bunch of pinning I have to do right now. So I apologize. We can't get to the sewing until I've done some strategic pinning, as it were. So welcome to my medieval sewing party, everyone. For those just joining, I know I'm completely cognizant of the fact that I am not in medieval clothing right now. As I explained earlier, I just came back from a dentist appointment. But I'm going to be doing lots of hand sewing. The very first thing I need to do actually is a bunch of pinning, because I've already done one set of seams. I only have, you can see here, the center gore is all nice and finished. So I only have 20 seams to go that have to be finished. Anthony, good afternoon from Daegu, South Korea. Thank you for joining us today. Where are you watching from? So I have been receiving a lot of interesting comments under some of my more recent short videos lately, mostly by people I think who are both ill-informed and are threatened by information that counters the narrative that they were taught in school about the Middle Ages, which sadly in many cases was incorrect. Canada, wow, it is early in the morning, very early in the morning there, right? Well, thank you for taking the time to watch, or depending on where you are, might be the middle of the night, I guess. Canada stretches across just as many, if not more, time zones than the contiguous mainland United States. So, yeah, good morning to you, sir. Middle of the night, you must be on the West Coast then. Yeah, you must be out there on the West Coast in British Columbia or somewhere thereabouts. Yeah. So one of the interesting and unfortunate comments I received recently under my video in which I assert that medieval peasants actually had a more nutritious diet than the wealthy people did in most of medieval Europe for most of the Middle Ages, I stated with good reason that white bread in the Middle Ages was the bread of the wealthy, and that whole grain sourdough bread was actually the bread of the poor, and not just poor, but the majority of the population. So probably 80% of the population, the bread they ate on a regular basis was made of whole grain, and it was sourdough, whereas the bread of the wealthy was white bread. And someone commented that I was lying, that I knew I should know better, that I should know that poor people were getting white bread in the Middle Ages just like they do now, and that the wealthy were enjoying whole grain sourdough bread. And I'm sorry, but it's just not true. It is absolutely not true. There's a couple of reasons that white bread was the luxury item in the Middle Ages. One of it has to do with wheat itself. Wheat is a crop, medieval wheat in particular, which it predates all of the selective breeding and God knows the genetic modifications that we've made to the grain to allow it to grow in much more inconvenient circumstances and conditions. Medieval wheat was a relatively delicate grain, and it required a very fertile soil in which to grow. Oh, poop. There's already a stain. Look at that. There's already a stain on it. Damn it. I haven't even worn it yet, and it already has a stain on it. Well, anyway. Medieval wheat especially, required very rich, fertile soil in which to grow. Not all of Europe actually has rich and fertile soil. Northern Europe, Germany, the Netherlands, UK, Ireland, Scandinavia, Finland, Northeast Europe, right? The Baltic states, Poland. Those places don't really have rich and fertile soil, didn't have rich and fertile soil, or rather it wasn't rich and fertile enough to allow wheat to grow easily and in large quantities. So wheat, especially in those parts of Europe, medieval Europe, was very much a luxury item because for the most part, it very often had to be imported. Instead, in the northern half of Europe, the kinds of grains that grew very well there in those soils were rye, millet, oats, but actually I found out that apparently most people didn't eat oats. They used the oats to feed their livestock, apparently, which is why you don't really see oats cropping up in medieval food references. And then for the even poorer people, they didn't even get bread made out of grain at all. Their bread was made out of pulses, like beans, fava beans, lentils, chickpeas, chestnut flour, acorns for the very poor. So no, they were not eating white bread. The lower 80% of society were not eating white bread made of wheat flour. And the other reason that white flour was even more expensive than whole grain wheat was is because the process of creating white wheat flour was laborious. The medieval process for refining flour was manual. They didn't have machines for it yet. And so it actually required taking the grain, grinding it really finely, sometimes multiple grindings, because once through the stone mills didn't necessarily give you a really finely ground flour. So it had to be fed back into the mill wheels multiple times, which is all done by hand. And then they would take the milled flour with the germ and everything still milled into it, and they would put it in large sacks, large linen sacks. And then they would have to manually beat it with bats until the white flour came through. And the germ and the bran were left on the inside of the sack, and sometimes that took multiple siftings as well. So it was a very laborious process to actually make white wheat flour. Which means those people are paid. They're not slave labor. They're getting paid for that work. So it costs more to make white wheat flour than to just grind it once or twice and sell it whole grain. Right? So what that means is that not only was white flour more expensive because it required lots of extra processing, which is extra labor, which costs more money, it was also more expensive per pound because it took more grain to yield a pound of refined white flour than it took to yield a pound of whole grain flour. A pound of whole grain flour is 1 to 1. 1 pound of grain equals 1 pound of whole grain flour, more or less. Whereas a pound of white flour was like maybe, I don't know, a pound and a half, depending on the grain, to get a pound of white flour. So it just cost more. So white flour in the Middle Ages was the purview of the wealthy. And they really liked their white bread to be really refined. And I've read some debates, papers debating whether medieval white flour was really white, was it really refined, or was there still some germ and bran left in it? Therefore, maybe it was more like 80% refined. There are some experts who are really convinced that they really did manage to get it 100% refined. So there was no bran and there was no germ left in it, which also means there was no nutritional value left in white bread in the Middle Ages. White bread in the Middle Ages was not enriched or fortified the way flour in the United States. White flour is enriched with vitamins. It's got a whole suite of vitamins added to it. Medieval flour didn't have that. So medieval flour of any kind didn't have those vitamins added. White flour in particular had no nutrients left in it. All it was is macronutrients. Refined starch, or starch, highly calorically accessible starch that would convert in your mouth into sugars, basically. The saliva in your mouth would automatically convert the starches in that flour into sugars already in your mouth, which means eating white bread is basically like eating sugar. Your body doesn't really view it that much differently because it's got nothing to mitigate the impact of carbohydrates. So that means that the wealthy in medieval Europe were actually eating a more nutritionally poor diet than the bottom 80%, than the peasants, than the laborers, and the artisans. So yeah, that's sorry, but it's not true. It is absolutely a lie that the poor people in the Middle Ages were eating white bread and the wealthy were eating whole grain sourdough. Quite the opposite, in fact, like the exact opposite. Parth, lovely to see you again. Thank you for joining us this evening here in Daegu, South Korea. Welcome to my favorite Starbucks in the world, my Hanok Starbucks in Daegu. I'm just sitting here doing some hand sewing while discussing some of the more ignorant comments that have been left under my videos that need to be debunked with good proper history lessons. Yep. Yeah. So welcome to my medieval sewing party. I know I'm not dressed in medieval clothing today, and I apologize for that. I just came from a dentist appointment. But I am working on hand sewing, finishing the seams of a medieval undergarment called a smock for ladies in the 15th century. And while I do so, I'm just going to discuss matters of medieval history, specifically from the perspective of daily life. Like I'm not a big fan of big man history, except as it affects how people live their daily lives. Then I get interested in what the big men were doing. But for the most part, I'm really more interested in how everyone across society lived their lives on a daily basis. What was the average morning like for them? What was the average afternoon and evening like for them? How did they go to the bathroom? How did they brush their teeth? Things like that interest me a lot more than battles and dates. Right? And so that's the focus of my channel. So if that kind of history interests you, if hands-on recreating various aspects of medieval material culture and other historical cultures interest you, then my channel, The Creative Contessa, is the right one for you. If you have any questions about medieval life, about medieval dance, food, clothing, music, games, feasting, even combat, then feel free to pop them in the comments and I will address them if I can. And if I can't, I will admit. I have no problem admitting when I don't know the answer. Ignorance is nothing of which to be ashamed. Willful ignorance, however, is a different conversation. Yeah, so don't forget to double tap that screen if you're enjoying. So yes, tangential to the conversation about white flour versus whole grain flour in the Middle Ages and whole grain bread, this led me down a bit of a rabbit hole. So I've done a whole lot more research on the topic since I last addressed the topic of the nutrition of the average people of medieval Europe, the bottom 80%, shall we say. And I think I need to clarify here that the bottom 80% on the socioeconomic ladder in Europe were not poor. That's another misconception about the Middle Ages, that peasants equals slaves or serfs, and that's not true. Peasant is just a farmer. That's it. It's an agricultural worker. Peasants could be wealthy, peasants could be poor, peasants could be in the middle. They could be any of those things. And the later the Middle Ages gets, the more likely peasants are to actually have some disposable income, right? So peasants were actually eating a very good diet. And most of Europe's population through most of the Middle Ages, with a decreasing ratio towards the end of the 15th century, most of them were somehow related to agricultural work. There was probably, I don't know, 60%, 70% of the population was somehow involved in agricultural work from a professional perspective. Then you had laborers and you had artisans and you had merchants who were also middle class, basically. None of those groups were poor. The poverty that people imagine that's medieval is actually an artifact of a consequence of the Industrial Revolution and the modern era, and reaches its apogee really in the Victorian era. That's when you see the really gross poverty, where you do have, you know, children living in the muck of the streets, rummaging through trash looking for food. That's not the medieval world. So now, that's not to say that someone else brought up the comment, even though I didn't address this topic at all, they said I was lying when I said that peasants had a more nutritionally dense diet. And their counter argument was that, you know, peasants didn't always have access to food. Okay, but nutritional density is a different metric than food security, right? A group of people can generally have a more nutritionally dense diet, but not always have access to the foods that make up their diet. And that's why we have the term food security, right? You can have a high degree of food security and have a diet that is garbage, which is a lot of people in the US actually have a great deal of food security, but the food that they can afford is nutritionally vacuous. It is vacant. It has nothing but macronutrients and not very healthy macronutrients at that. But they have a lot of food, so they've got great food security, right? In the Middle Ages, however, food security was the food supply was not as insecure as people seem to imagine it was, right? Okay, so there were absolutely famines across the Middle Ages, across history, across human history, to the modern day. There still are famines happening across the world. And I honestly think we're probably about to have a famine in the US because of our monoculture practices, but that's a different conversation. So yeah, famines, yes, of course there were famines in the Middle Ages, but there weren't more famines in the Middle Ages than there were at any other time in human history, really. It's only relatively recently in places like Europe and the US that we've managed to really secure the food supply. Through a variety of practices that might actually be the reason we start having an insecure food supply. But I digress. But there were famines across the Middle Ages. And of course, during those times of famine, you're right, the bottom 80% of people suffered more than the wealthy. But that didn't change the fact that the wealthy were still eating, when they had food, the wealthy were getting fewer, they had a much less well-balanced diet, right? So when the bottom 80% did have access to food, when there wasn't a famine, when there wasn't a war happening in which soldiers were ransacking their homes and destroying their crops, right? The bottom 80% of the Europe's population ate a much more well-balanced, nutritious diet than the wealthy, full stop. Food security came and went, but it wasn't. Food security wasn't as much of a problem as people imagine it to be. It wasn't a factor of daily life. There are periods in specific spots of medieval Europe, very discrete periods, where malnutrition is absolutely an issue, due mostly to famine, which is usually caused in that era mostly caused by weather. Inclement weather causing, long periods of rain, or that in which the sun doesn't shine and the crops all rot, something like that. Right? That does happen, but it's not this constant presence in medieval life that people seem to think it is. Yeah. Oh, good morning, Twitchy. It's good to see you again. It's good to see you again. Am I at a bar? No, I am actually at a Starbucks coffee house. This is a building that was built in the 17th century style of Korean architecture. And yeah, you can see I have my tea. So yeah, not a bar. This is just happy people at a cafe talking. Normally, there aren't as many people here at this time. These people should be at dinner. I don't know why they're here. Yeah, so twitchy comments about the whole food insecurity situation and famine being caused in some cases by weather. And yeah, insects and blight. Yeah, blight is something that happens, although blight happens, as far as I understand. My understanding is that blight happens a lot less in the Middle Ages than it does in the modern era starting with the Reformation, because starting in the 16th century, agricultural practices start shifting towards monoculture slowly. And then by the 19th century, we kind of reached the height of that, which is why the potato blight was so horrific. It was so widespread, so prolific because of monoculture. So the blight is less of an issue in the Middle Ages, because they haven't reached that level of monoculture, which in essence means that you have one strain, one breed of one cultivar of wheat or one cultivar of rye, and so if a disease attacks the wheat, then it's going to get them all, whereas if you have multiple cultivars, then the other ones might have resistance to it. Yeah. Yeah, sure, it still occasionally happens, and insects were definitely more of an issue. Yeah, 100%. But again, still not as prolific as people imagine it. Oh, Twitchy, guess what? A PhD student and everyone else, a PhD candidate in archaeology from the University of Durham is presenting at the Leeds Medieval Congress and reached out to me to ask if they could use some of my content in their presentation on the gray filter of the entertainment industry on the Middle Ages, and as using me as a reference, as a creator to follow for helping unlearn the myths of the Middle Ages. So I was really honored to receive that. I feel like I'm doing good work. I'm doing good work, if that's the kind of attention I'm getting. Yeah, I know, right? I'm still kind of giddy about it. I just got this email 2 hours ago. So I'm really excited to be mentioned by name and have my picture up on a screen in front of real academics at the Leeds Medieval Congress. I have to say, it's one of my dreams of mine is to present at Kalamazoo and to present at Leeds. Now, to do either of that, I would actually have to get my ass together and write a paper or submit or propose a topic for a talk. It doesn't necessarily have to be a paper, but I would have to actually come up with a proposal for a talk. So, I mean, it's not like they've rejected me. I just haven't put it all together. I haven't sat down and done it. I should do it, though. I really should. Twitchy, what do you think? If I were to give a talk at the Kalamazoo Medieval Conference or at Leeds, what do you think? What should my topic be? And then everyone, let me know. What do you think? What topic should I talk about? Should I give a talk on at one of these epic, very prestigious medieval conferences with a whole bunch of really bona fide academics? But the nice thing is that the academic world is starting to recognize the value of independent researchers. So there isn't the same level of intellectual snobbery or academic snobbery that there used to be. So I'm hoping that the climate has changed enough that with my portfolio of accomplishments and research, that I could maybe get a spot at the table. Eric Gassmann, herzlich willkommen. Schön, dich nochmal zu sehen. Ist ja lange her, oder? Yeah. Potential polished version of your turret reconstruction. Nice, that's a good point. I could absolutely do a presentation on, and maybe sort of more generally on 15th century headwear, and talk about potential approaches to reconstruction, referencing a combination of documentary resources plus the archaeology. Yeah, I think that could be very interesting, and of course combining with it my practical experience wearing these damn things. Yep, I think you're right. That could be actually very interesting, because it would also bring to life a lot of these great ladies in history, and what their lives were like, because these are the kinds of headdresses they were wearing on a relatively daily basis. So it will give more life to characters like Margaret of France, and Margaret Beaufort, and Elizabeth Woodville, Margaret of York, which, by the way, apparently Margaret of York generally referred to herself as Margaret of England when she signed her documents and her letters. Until of course, Henry VII usurped the throne, and then she apparently stopped referring to herself as Margaret of England. But she was more likely to refer to herself as Margaret of England than Margaret of York. The French, on the other hand, often called her Margaret of York, which is interesting. Or the French speakers referred to as Margaret of York, which I thought was interesting. Yep. So yeah, I thought I would address that topic about white bread versus other grains of bread, and also address the topic of these other kinds of bread that medieval people ate that were probably both dense but also nutritionally dense, and that were gluten-free, actually. So for people who couldn't afford grain, we'll say the bottom 15% of society, bottom 20% maybe in bad years, they would actually make their bread out of pulses, out of garbanzo bean flour, out of lentil flour, out of fava bean flour. And I actually found a reference in Margherita Dattini's letters to her husband of making fava bean flour to make into a mixed grain bread for the workmen, for the laborers who worked on their estate. And then, of course, for the even harder on their luck, there was acorn flour. However, I will implore you, please, to not just go out and get some acorns and grind them and make them into bread. Some humans, I don't know when, I don't know where exactly, but at some point humans figured out that yes, you could use acorn flour to make bread, or anything, I guess, out of flour that you wanted, as long as you soaked the acorns over a period of 7 weeks in 7 changes of water, changing the water once a week, to soak out the toxic tannins. If you do not do that to the acorns, you will regret your life choices. And I've often wondered who were the unlucky test bunnies, that were humans, no doubt, who tried out the acorn flour after one not soaking it, and then trying soaking it after a week, and then 2 weeks, and then 3 weeks, and 4 weeks, et cetera, until finally, after 7 weeks of soaking, they didn't get suffer any digestive distress. So I've often wondered how that process went. But at the end of the day, the point is that is what they did. So you can't just go and harvest a bunch of acorns that have fallen and hope that it turns out well. It won't. So you have to soak it in 7 changes of water. But acorn flour bread would yield something that was almost solid enough to be construction material, and possibly, if you let it go stale, it might work out that way. Yeah. Oh, Red Australia. Lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, and alkaline water too. Yeah. Twitchy said, yeah, good point. That it's not just any water. It needs to be an alkali solution. Actually, lye is one of those magic solutions of the Middle Ages that is so useful for so many different aspects of medieval production, of producing foodstuffs especially, but also dyeing and tanning and laundry. And it really is lye. Lye is the miracle chemical of the Middle Ages, maybe even the pre-modern era, I guess, entirely. Yep. Whole grain bread is healthier. Plasma zombie. Yeah, so whole grain bread is healthier and also not. It's an interesting conundrum with whole grain bread. So whole grain bread, the problem with whole grain bread that hasn't been sprouted and hasn't been soaked, where the grain hasn't been soaked, sprouted, and soured, fermented, is that grains are a kind of seed, and all seeds have what are called phytonutrients on the outside, phytic acid. And this is a chemical that is designed by nature to prevent the seed from being broken down in your intestines, because the idea is that animals will eat the seeds. The seed will process through your entire digestive tract, and in your intestines, it will bond with the micronutrients that are there in your intestines and in your stomach too, presumably. So micronutrients or vitamins. And then it will actually leach the nutrients out of your body, and then you will excrete them out. And the seed will therefore exit the digestive tract fertilized and ready to grow. So that means if you're eating whole grains and seeds and nuts and not soaking them, fermenting them, etc. first, that's what's going to happen. You will lose more nutrients than you gain from doing so. But happily, medieval people fermented their bread. They ate true sourdough, especially those who were eating the whole grain bread. However, the people eating the manchet, the wealthy people eating the white bread, they did not They generally actually used brewer's barm, which is basically fresh yeast. Oh, there's a kitty out there. I don't know if you can see it, sorry. No, you can't see him. Okay, sorry. He's a cutie. He's got a cute bobtail. Anyway, they were using brewer's yeast as fresh yeast to learn, but the shirt did not survive. Linen does not often survive well in most of the archaeological record. And so when they were doing repair work on the church, restoration work, they opened up his tomb and they found his farsetto, his doublet, was still in there. And when they started examining it, they found out that, this thing doesn't actually have an end, they found out that his farsetto, his doublet, had been padded with a blend of 5 fibers. It had been padded with silk roving basically. It had been padded with cotton. It had been padded with hemp. It had been padded with wool, and it had been padded with linen. And all of them basically, like what some of you might know as roving or carded bats. So basically fibers that had been combed into, not needled into any kind of like solid piece, but just like the kind of fibers you use to spin into thread. And that those had just been laid down in between a layer of hemp and a layer of linen, and then quilted, and then those had been, the silk velvet top layer was quilted over top of that. And I really want to try this on an arming garment for my beloved husband, because I suspect that blend of fibers was not accidental, and obviously it wasn't accidental, they chose it, but I mean, it was chosen intentionally, and with the knowledge that the linen and the hemp would be very, very breathable. The cotton would be durable and lofty. The silk would be very antimicrobial, and the wool would breathe well, would add loft, and would also, add its own uniqueness to the collective. Not to quote Star Trek, The Next Generation. And so I really want to get this, I'm going to, at this medieval festival I'm attending, there's a couple of very excellent textile fiber arts suppliers there. And I plan on getting a bunch of these rovings. And the next farsetto I make for Ryan, I'm going to be using this blend of materials, of fibers to do the padding. And I'll be interested to see what it has to say about that versus just pure cotton batting as the padding, to see just how much better it breathes. And we'll test it out maybe in December in Thailand to really put the padded garment through the ringer, right? We'll test it out in the heat and humidity of Thailand in December. So yeah. Oh gosh, I am sorry guys, for whatever reason. Here, let me try this. The live chat is just it's not showing me your comments. I'm not ignoring you. I apologize profusely. I feel like I'm talking into the void, and you probably feel like you're shouting at me and I'm not hearing you. Well, I'm not, because the live chat is ignoring me. So I apologize. I'm not willfully disregarding any questions or comments you may have. But if you're enjoying, please double tap that screen and consider subscribing. So that's a big item on my horizon, is that 2-week Living History Festival, at which I will have my own small household of about 16 people in my entourage, in my Contessa entourage, and we will be living our best 15th century glamping lives We will be dancing and telling stories and playing 15th century games and listening to live 15th century music played by professional musicians and just engaging in all kinds of courtly shenanigans and flirtation. There's going to be deeds of arms in full harness. I'm hosting a 15th century ball, the red and gold ball, and I will be live streaming that ball, so you can tune into that and see what it looks like when I host a ball. And I'll be live streaming all of my dance classes, so you'll be able to see that. If you're interested in checking out medieval dance, then, oh, there it is. It's working now. Yay. Welcome back, live stream. HH, lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us again. How are you doing this fine evening? So if you're interested in seeing what medieval dance is like and also seeing my teaching techniques, which have been praised very highly, I am not going to pretend false modesty, then make sure to hit that notification bell and make certain that all is ticked. Now I am going to go ahead and schedule those live streams because I know exactly when I'm teaching those classes. This event I'm attending is called Penzik. About 10,000 people attend, and it has a massive university at which hundreds of classes on medieval and Renaissance living history are taught every day. Everything from hands-on fiber arts and costuming classes to how to build a medieval oven to 8th century Old English poetry in original language to medieval combat techniques, medieval and Renaissance dance. So the schedule, those classes are already scheduled, and so I know my schedule, so I'll go ahead and schedule the classes as live streams so you can plan them into your calendar if you wish to join in from remotely and learn some medieval and or Renaissance dance. Yeah. Oh, yes, Twitchy, if obviously now is not the time maybe to be traveling to the US, but some year you should definitely come and be part of my entourage. Absolutely. I need a nun. I need a nun. I really do. I need a nun cloistered nun. I need a pizzoquera to come and be part of my entourage. 100%. Today's the hottest day this year, isn't it? Especially Daegu. Yeah, it's a little, this is maybe the toastiest it's been this year, but I have to say, this summer has been very pleasant overall. We've had a lot of rainy, overcast monsoon days, so I can't complain. And I will confess that I grew up in a much more hotter, more humid place with no air conditioning, so this is okay. I don't have a problem being out and about in this weather. I don't even have the air conditioning on in my apartment. So would I prefer it to not be this hot? Yes. But it's okay. It's fine. I can tolerate it. It's fine. Yeah, that sounds lovely. Yeah, it would be lovely to have you in my entourage, Twitchy. Oh God, I think you would love my people. I think you would love my people. You would love my gentlemen and you would love my ladies. They're an excellent, excellent ensemble of people. A great cast of characters, as it were. Yeah, right? I'm not wrong, right, HH? This is the coolest summer I've had in Korea ever. And this is the most rain, it hasn't really monsooned much in the last several decades. It's been getting drier and drier. So I'm really appreciating this. If we can just keep up with the nice overcast rainy days, yay. Yep. So I forget, HH, are you in Busan? I'm trying to, if you don't want to announce your location on my live stream, that's okay too. Don't feel that you have to. I totally understand you wanting to keep your privacy. No problem. UK is set for more months of heat. Yeah, Europe's been getting hotter and hotter. Everywhere has been heating up. Hotter and drier. Oh, right. Gotcha, HH. Yep. Yeah, I haven't been there yet. I transit through there all the time, right, on the train, going north and south. And I've never actually, I need to just get off the train and just wander around a bit. It's one of those really new modern cities in Korea, so it's got a whole, I've seen pictures, it's got a different vibe. So I really do just need to get out. You and I should meet up sometime for some coffee or something, if you wouldn't mind. I'd love that, personally. Yeah. Yeah, the heat dome, yeah. Oh, wait, I thought you meant Daejeon. Sorry, you're in Jeju, not Daejeon. Well, the next time I get to Jeju, I'll try to get the word out to you, and then we can meet up. You said DJ, I thought Daejeon. I apologize. Oh gosh. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I know where you are. Amir. Amir, welcome. Thank you for joining. Welcome to my medieval sewing party. I am actually working on medieval underwear right now. We're just talking about history and generally chatting. So yeah. Are there any particular questions about anything you've read about the Middle Ages or heard about lately? My recent reading, I've been reading into the Datini family, and they are a very interesting family from 14th century Italy, actually from Prato. Very interesting history. So Francesco di Marco Datini was actually the son of an innkeeper. And he's born in 1334, I believe, so in the 1330s. He is born right after that famine that really rocked Northern Europe in the first quarter of the 14th century. And he is born to an innkeeper, and he manages to climb the socioeconomic ladder very well, and he becomes a wealthy merchant. And then when there is the crisis in the papacy, one of the several crises in the papacy, in which the papacy basically splits and the Pope goes to Avignon to be under the protection of the French king, he follows the papal court to Avignon. And he manages to really rise through the ranks based on his merit, his intelligence, his skill. And there he meets Margherita Bandini, who is the daughter of a disgraced Florentine noble family who basically get kicked out of Florence because they're noble. And so they end up also going to the papal court in Avignon. So she's actually a noblewoman. And he's become a wealthy merchant in the meanwhile. He's made good, right? Tavern keeper's child. And they get married, right? It's a marriage of convenience. He gets the prestige of her noble blood, and their children, therefore, would share in that lineage. She gets the benefit of his wealth. But if we read the letters between them, there seems to have been a genuine affection and respect between them. And she takes up the running of his household and the partnership in his business with alacrity. And in order to grow the business, he actually sets up a shop in Florence and goes and takes up residence in Florence and leaves her in Prato with their palazzo that he's built over top of his father's inn. Builds this very large sprawling palazzo in downtown Prato, and leaves his business there. And though he has a partner there, he trusts his wife Margherita to oversee the partner. And he discusses matters of business with her on a regular basis and has her running all sorts of errands in the city on his behalf for his business. So she's running this household that has some 30 people in it. She's running estates out in the countryside in Prato where they have farms and a villa. She's managing their garden. She's managing the supply of food for everyone. She's managing the procurement and creation of clothing for him and the family and her. And in some cases, possibly making the garments herself. She's a busy woman. And because it's about in the 1380s, I think, that he goes to Florence. Because he's there in Florence and she's in Prato, she takes care of him by sending him constant shipments of supplies. She makes food for him, she bakes bread for him, or she has food made for him, she has food baked for him, right? There's an implication that she's still directly involved in the making of these foodstuffs, despite her status, and despite having been raised a noblewoman. And she sends these things to him on a regular basis, and communicates about it in detail, talks about food. All her letters talk about food. And so this correspondence that they shared is this rich window into daily life in 14th century Italy, northern Italy, and specifically in a family that was a family of mixed economy. Now the term famiglia in 14th century Italian does not mean quite what it does now. It doesn't just mean your blood relatives. Familia means your entire affinity in your household, the people who work for you directly in your household, who live with you, who are there with you on a daily basis. And so she's basically taking care of this familia, this affinity of 30 people that includes farmers, it includes laborers, it includes, in some cases, artisans, it includes guests who just come and stay for protracted periods of time, sometimes other merchants, sometimes family, sometimes really extended family, and she just handles it all with alacrity, keeps it all going, keeps the machine greased. So for about 20 plus years, I think if I recall correctly, Francesco never moves back to Prato. And they do see each other occasionally over that time, but not terribly often. And I'll take it a step further. Apparently, very typical of Italian men in this era, any man in Europe in this era, actually, Francesco has a natural child with a servant. Natural child is euphemism for a child born out of wedlock. But Margherita happily raises this child like her own. She treats the child like her own. She refers to this child as though this child were her own. And Francesco has left this child with her back in Prato. So talk about an amazing woman. I'm just so impressed by Margherita. I have ordered a book it's a publication, a translation of her letters called Letters to Francesco by Margherita Dattini. And I'm excited to get this book and start reading more of the letters because I've only read a couple of them at this point. And I'm hoping it's a bilingual edition because I don't always trust translations. I'm a professional translator originally, and I really prefer to see the original language, especially when it comes to food and clothing terminology from the Middle Ages, because a lot of translators who do this work, who translate these texts, are not experts in medieval material culture, and so they make choices that obscure the original really specific meanings in the original sources. So I'm hoping that it's a bilingual translation. I'll let you know when I get it. And then once I get it, I will definitely be doing medieval storytime readings, letters from Margherita to Francesco. And so we can open that window into the past and see what life was like for these people. Because in her letters, she's not just talking about the food and preparations for him. She talks about everything she does on a daily basis. She talks about the food that she has to have made or make herself for the people working under them, which tells us that in 14th century Italy, at least in Tuscany, the custom was for the employer to take care of their employees, to feed them. This is the proto canteen. She's the one making them breakfast, lunch, and dinner. She's the one serving it to them. They actually have, in their household inventory, they actually have serving equipment specifically for feeding this unit, this minor military unit, this platoon of employees. So I'm really excited to get these letters and delve more deeply into those aspects. Yeah. Yeah, hi Haas, good to see you again, my friend. Welcome back. I know I'm in normal clothing. It's because I had a dentist appointment and I decided I didn't feel like putting on 15th century clothing for that, and then I just decided to do an ad hoc sewing party here. I know it's very odd looking, I get it. Oh, Unsel, welcome back. Osaoseo, annyeong, lovely to see you again. Thank you for joining us. Okay, wait, hold on a minute. I missed some comments. Let me see. Is this during the time of the three popes? Yes, Eric, this is, what's her name? No, so the time of the three popes is actually, the three popes, I think, comes after, a little bit after these letters, actually. But it is the time of the Avignon papacy, right? Which I'm pretty certain there was at least one pretender in Rome. So maybe it might be during the time of the three popes. But yeah, it is in that period. So I'm very excited to see what other things Margherita has to teach us about all these different levels of society. And actually, their home itself is very interesting because Francesco was very involved in the construction of his properties and kept extensive records on the designing and building of his new palazzo. And what's really fascinating to me about Francesco's palazzo, Francesco and Margherita's palazzo, is that he takes his father's tavern, and he expands it and turns it into a palazzo. So it really is like this really classic, I don't want to say rags to riches, but homeboy, man made good, right? Who doesn't abandon his childhood home, but takes it and turns it into a new status symbol. And the construction of their home is very interesting because it's actually what I would call a proto-Renaissance palazzo. Because in the 14th century, to be frank, people are still mostly building tower houses. They haven't really started building the what most people would call the Renaissance palazzo, like the Palazzo Medici or the Palazzo Strozzi in Florence. But his is a proto-Renaissance palazzo. It is not a big, tall tower house. I guess he isn't worried about gangs coming after him in the night. And so he actually, for instance, there's two kitchens. There's a kitchen on the ground floor, which is real unusual. And then there's a kitchen on the top floor with a floor in between. And he's got a garden in front of it. Like there's used to be this massive garden in front of it. The palazzo is still there, but it's very much reduced in size. It's not this full size it used to be. A lot of the premises have been turned into something else. And that is because when Francesco dies, he did succeed in having one child. So either Margherita is unable to conceive or their relationship was platonic, mostly. Either way, he dies without an heir in 1410, but in his will, he insists that the palazzo be turned into a house for the poor, a foundation to support the poor, and he endows it with a huge chunk of his wealth. I mean, he doesn't leave Margherita penniless. He leaves her. She's set also, but he leaves a vast portion of his wealth to endow this home for the poor. And that foundation is operating to this day as a charitable foundation in an unbroken line. So this man who was born in the 14th century, lived through the Black Death, lived to a ripe old age. So he died at 85. Yeah, he died at 85. That's kind of crazy. 70, 80. He died at the age of 80. 85. No, he was 85. Yeah, he died at the age of 85. That's a respectable age now, let alone for someone who lived through the Black Death. And he decides to take all of his wealth, large portion of his wealth, and endow this home for the poor. That's still operating to this day. And it was a place where poor people actually went and lived and were taken care of. It basically became a hospital, but a hospital specifically for the poor. And so that really, it's another more evidence of how poverty in the Middle Ages was treated much differently than it was after the Reformation and into the modern era, right? That there were many better facilities, there were better ways, there were more opportunities for poor people to find shelter and clothing and food and find their way out of poverty, or be helped out of poverty, actually. So yeah, the more I read about the Dattini family, the more I'm very interested in them. you know that I like hanbok, but you're worried that young bean dowry is actually bad for your knees and lumbar spine. It's fine. I appreciate that, but I'm okay. My posture is pretty untouchable. My posture is pretty untouchable. I've been doing a lot of very posture perfect dance for 30 years. I'm okay. I appreciate your concern. I do, but it's okay. Yeah, I'm okay. Young Mandari. I appreciate the concern, though. Yeah. Welcome, Moon Hunter. Thank you for joining us today. The live stream is frozen again. Again, I apologize, everyone. I don't know what's going on with YouTube today. It's just not playing ball. So, oh, there's a comment. Yay. Speaking of which, thank you for the reminder. I should remember to drink tea occasionally. Well, if you're enjoying this medieval sewing party live stream, don't forget to double tap that screen, everyone, and consider subscribing. Yeah, young Bandari. Yeah. Sorry, the screen is like a meter away, and unfortunately the Hangul is super tiny, so I have to lean in closer to actually read it than I do the Latin letters. Yeah, I've actually become much more flexible and much more mobile since moving to Korea and doing a lot more floor sitting. It's actually been very, very good for me. And I think that's why actually a lot of elderly Korean people are still very mobile and can actually get up off the ground, whereas most Western elderly people cannot. They can't sit on the ground. They can't get up. They can't lift themselves off of the ground. It's why so many older people, senior citizens, and for instance, the U.S., if they fall down, they can't get themselves back up again. They don't have the musculature for it. They don't have the flexibility for it. So I'm very grateful for all the floor sitting I've been doing here. Yeah. Okay, so what else have I been reading about lately? I've been looking more into the infrastructure in kitchens, in medieval kitchens, because that's always very interesting to see how foods were actually prepared. And I think modernly, a lot of Westerners who are used to having ovens in their home assume that that we've always had ovens in our homes, and that's just not true. In medieval Europe, most homes did not have an oven, and even the homes that had ovens as part of the property, the ovens were generally not inside the kitchen. They were in a separate building, an outhouse, usually in the courtyard, with good reason. But you don't necessarily have to have an oven to actually do baking. So one of the ways that medieval people could bake something without having an oven is by taking the clay pots that they used for general cooking, and then you actually put your baked good inside of it. So if it's a pie or meat that you want to bake, and then you put a lid on it, and then you put it in the coals, and then you put coals on top of it, and then it's got heat being applied to it, radiant heat across the whole surface basically, and then it actually bakes. The heat radiates through the clay into the item. So that's one way that things could be baked. There is also, in Italy, they had this item called a testo, and I think they had them, I'm pretty certain they had them in Northern Europe as well, called a curfew, although a curfew has a different function, but they're called a testo. And you would actually, it's basically a dome lid with a handle, and it's made out of clay, it's ceramic. And you would actually use that to cover the thing that you were baking, and then you put coals on top of that, and then that becomes the oven, basically. So your coals have to be on fire, obviously. So yeah, so there were a couple of different ways to bake items, even if you didn't have an oven yourself. But the heat on those is not going to get nearly hot enough for like bread baking. For bread baking, you need an oven. You really do. So those kinds of baking were actually used mostly for home cooking or for things that don't require high heat, like really high heat. So pies and roasts and that kind of thing. Ovens, on the other hand, were very often communal, which means the town or the village would have an oven, and the baker had the license to operate the oven, and you would actually pay the baker to bake your goods for you. You would make the bread, you would make the pies, you would make the pastries. You would then deliver them to the baker would bake them, you would pay the baker for baking them, and then you would get them back again. And medieval ovens people imagine, probably when most people imagine a medieval oven, they probably envision a wood-fired pizza oven, and that's actually not far off, except that wood-fired pizza ovens, they leave the fire in them generally now to get that extra level of flavor, but not in the medieval oven. In a medieval oven, they would build the fire inside the oven, they would bring the oven up to heat, so it would take a while actually, like a couple of hours in many cases to bring the oven up to heat. And then they would scrape out the fire and the oven would retain the heat for a long time. And then you put your baked goods in. Now, even though they scraped out the oven, very often there was still ash, a little light layer of ash left on the bottom of the oven. So that meant that a lot of bread actually ended up with ash in the crust, which is why the bottom of the bread was very often pared away from the loaf. And that was very often given to poor people as alms or used as bread trenchers in some cases, although the information I've found about bread trenchers tends to indicate that the bread was actually sliced up neatly into a multitude of trenchers and not just the bottom of the crust. Anyway, point is that's many people think that's the origin of the term upper crust, right? The upper crust was the part of the bread that the wealthy people ate. So, therefore, the upper crust. Now, I haven't actually seen any proof positive of that, but that's a theory that I have first used. I should that new rabbit hole for me, but not right now. Well, I'm glad you've been. Yeah, HH says when you bake, temperature is crucial. I wonder how they bake bread properly. So bread, yeah. So bread doesn't have to be as temperature sensitive as we think it is, as we think it does. Sourdough bread really just needs like a high temperature, and then you get that nice bloom. And they would know, how do you control the temperature in a medieval oven? So you don't control the temperature, but a good baker would know the oven. They would, it's an oven that they would have used a lot. They would understand. They would understand that in the first hour after pulling out the fire, it's this hot. The next hour, it's this hot, right? And so they would put in baked goods based on how hot, in the order in which things need more heat. So like sourdough needs a really good high heat at the beginning to get that bloom, right? And then maybe as it cools down, then they put in pies that need a lower heat and a more delicate baking. So they would also be able to tell the heat. They would have developed a sense, and hear me out on this, they would have been able to develop a sense of the actual temperature in the oven just by holding their hand up, not in the oven, outside, just outside of the oven, right? They would be able to feel the temperature, and they would have developed an innate sense of how hot it actually was in terms of how much that heat would impact the food. There is also, in the later period when you start getting paper is more common, bakers would actually use paper. So they would put a piece of paper, a little slip of paper, into the oven, and they would see how quickly it burned to gauge how hot it was. So that's another way to do it. But I don't think they were doing that in the Middle Ages, because paper was, in most of the Middle Ages anyway, paper was a luxury item. Yeah. Yeah, experience was very much key to both cooking and baking in the Middle Ages. It's not that those things were unscientific. It's just that their version of the science was based on experience, but they still had a system. They still understood, the oven is this hot now. Now we put in the white bread instead of the whole grain bread, right? Now we put in the yeast, the yeasted and egg enriched, milk enriched sweet bread, right? Now we put in the custard tart, right? So that is how a medieval baker would have done it. There would have been an order of operations. Like they would have, I imagine, I don't have documentation for this, but logicking my way through it, I would imagine that the baker would probably get a delivery of different items, and they would set them out in order. And people would probably know, if you want your bread to be baked, you need to get it to the baker at this time because this is when the oven is hot. If you want your pies to be baked, you need to get them to the baker at this time because this is when the oven is at the right temperature for that. Like I imagine there was probably a rhythm, and probably everyone in the town knew it. Well, all the people involved in the food production process would have known it. Yep. Ratio of ingredients is very important, and bread varies so much on the weather. And again, a good baker will develop a sense. They will be able to develop a feel in their fingers. They will be able to, from the visuals, they'll be able to look at the dough and realize its hydration level and realize whether it needs more flour or less flour. It's a sense you develop from doing a lot of bread baking. You develop that innate sense. Ratios, they had scales. They had balanced scales, and they used them. I know they used them because occasionally a recipe will actually say, provide an actual weight. So I know they had kitchen scales. But that being said, a good baker will just develop a sense. Like they'll be able to touch the dough and think, oh, this needs more hydration. Oh, it's too hydrated, add a little more flour. Right? It's when you've been doing this your whole life. Like I think bakers' apprentices, they started apprenticeships at 7. So when you start at the age of 7, learning to make bread from a professional who already knows everything, and they teach you all their secrets, then you just know, right? We're in the modern world, in many cases, we're reinventing the wheel very often, right? We are reinventing how to make good sourdough. But they didn't have to go through that process. They learned through apprenticeship. Yeah. Bis dann, Erik. Herzlichen Dank. Mach's gut dann. I mean, yeah, ratio of ingredients absolutely matters. But I know that people who do a lot of sourdough baking, for instance, if they've been doing it especially for years, they just develop a sense. And, when you're 7 years old and you start an apprenticeship, by the time you hit 20, there's so much you've learned. You know all the tricks. You've developed that sense. Yeah. So 100%. Let's see. Oh gosh, what did I do with that needle? I'm so sad. Oh wait, is this the good needle? That is not. Nope. So yeah. Speaking of Korean clothing, speaking of hanbok, I just found a 15th century. Not a 15th century report. I found an excavation report from a 15th century tomb that belonged to a Korean noblewoman who was sent to Ming court and became the consort of the Ming emperor. He died. She came back to Korea, lived the rest of her years in Korea, and then died and was interred in Korea. And her tomb was excavated. I think she died in the 1450s. No, that doesn't sound right, thinking about the dates. I think she died in the 1480s. And they excavated her tomb, and her tomb had lots of clothing in it and lots of amazing objects in it, like pouches and buttons and all kinds of things you don't usually find in tombs anymore. And her garments showed a mix of very clearly Joseon, 15th century Joseon style garments and Ming Dynasty style garments. And they found records for her family, for her household. They found records of gifts she had received and purchases that had been made for her household, including fabric. And so I actually have these 15th century Korean records about purchases for making clothing in her household. And apparently she was buying fabric in massive quantities all at once. Bulk purchases, lots of mochi, lots of reimi and dyed reimi, beautiful bright colors. And I'm talking like 56, what would be the equivalent of like 50 meters at a time, and black and blue and purple, really rich colors. So, we can't always know 100% what people wore from the tomb finds, because there could be a selection bias in what gets placed in a tomb. also what survives in a tomb. But here we have expense accounts from the 15th century, from this noblewoman's household, about the purchases that she made for her household, for herself and the other members of her family to make garments. So this is a really interesting report, and the pictures are also really, really interesting. These garments, like the ones that, you can tell which ones she definitely had while she was the Ming consort. So I was very excited to have that shared with me. Unfortunately, it is mostly in Korean that is at a level of Korean that I'm not, my Korean isn't there yet. And unfortunately, archaeological reports do not translate really well using translation software because the terminology is too specialized. But I'm hoping to be able to start my intensive Korean courses hopefully this fall. We'll see. Long story of why it's been almost impossible for me to do so before now. And then I'll be able to get my Korean up to the academic level I need to read these reports more comfortably. But even what I was able to make out was just very exciting. Comment, I quit baking years ago because shaping dough is so annoying. Oh really? I enjoy shaping sourdough. I don't know why. I love making sourdough bread. I love folding. I love folding dough and I love shaping it. I love the way the dough feels in my hands. It's just so soft and silky and cushiony and springy. I don't know. I just love it. No, so HH, the AI did a terrible job on all the translation software does a terrible job with these archaeological reports. It's not good. It's not good. It's real bad. Real rough. Because the language, the terminology for these historical garments is also often in Chinese characters. And in Chinese characters that have the meaning that they had in the 15th century, which is not necessarily the meaning they have now. So it's rough. Not good. This is not good, and I just don't have the funds, unfortunately, to have them professionally translated by an actual human who actually understands fashion history, Korean fashion history. So yeah, HH, it's a problem. It reads like gobbledygook. It reads like someone, you know what it reads like? The translations read like someone was blind texting. Like they weren't looking at their screen, they were just using their thumbs to type the words, and then whatever words came out, that's what the translation reads like. It's really bad. Yeah, so I'm hoping to get my Korean up to that level. I mean, but it's what I've been wanting to do that for a long time. I've been wanting to improve my Korean to that level. This is something I've been doing a lot of self-study with, Rosetta Stone. But unfortunately, the only intensive Korean courses available here in Daegu are at Yeongnam University. The unfortunate part about that is I don't have the right visa to be able to take the Korean courses. And to get the right visa, I would have to go and spend a bunch of time in the US, which I don't want to do. So I'm hoping that we can surmount that by Ryan. Yeah. Real translator is important. I know, it's crazy, right, Han? Right? It's almost like AI is not the be-all and end-all that everyone says it should be. In fact, I recently saw the consequence of ChatGPT being used to create a handout about medieval dance. It was real wrong. Everything was wrong. There was nothing right. Everything was wrong. Every single thing it said was wrong, but it all sounded right. Every dance was misattributed, the dates were wrong, the steps were wrong, the music that it talked about was wrong, the attributed composer of the dance was wrong. So it just really underscored how awful it is that people are using large language model engines to do all of their research now. Because just like most people, the person who made this handout about medieval dance didn't do their due diligence. They didn't go and check a single thing. They just accepted it as it came out, which is the way most people use large language models. So it's, and by the time, here's the thing about using those large language models for research. By the time you finish checking everything it tells you, you could have just done the research yourself using actual valid history books and primary sources. You've saved no time, really. You know? Yeah, it's. I think Korean is easy to write, but grammar is extra hard. It is vague. No, so I mean, so here's my take on Korean as a linguist, like who's studied like 8 languages at this point. Like most languages, Korean has its challenges. I think for a Westerner, especially a native English speaker, the hardest aspect of Korean for me, anyway, is not actually any of the language itself. It's that you have all of these different levels of formality that affect how the verb is conjugated and also the pronouns you use. And so those distinctions are not innate to me. I don't come from that kind of culture. So for a Korean, native Korean, who's been raised in Korea, Koreans have a natural a sense that has been basically trained into them of this person is senior to me on the hierarchy, but they're younger than I am. They're not a friend, they're an acquaintance, and so you automatically know how to treat your verb and what kind of pronoun you should use for them and what kind of level of formality with which you should address them. I have to go through this whole spreadsheet in my head of they're older than me, but they're a good friend. We're equal on the hierarchy in terms of rank in society, but they are older than me, right? And so like I have to go through this process to come up with the right way to conjugate my verb. I think that's the most challenging thing, honestly. And also that, like most languages, Korean has more colloquial forms that end up actually getting used more in practice than the forms that they teach in formal Korean classes. Yeah. Oh, really, HH? Well, that's good. I'm glad they think I'm cute because I'm not trying to offend anyone. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. And God knows, sometimes I do. Sometimes I'm way too informal because I watch K-drama and I'm the kind of linguist who picks up what I hear. And so I hear, I hear behind me, these are best friends chatting, right? So I can hear the way they talk to each other. And so I'll walk up to my Korean friends and I'll just, I'll be like, mashine? And they're like, I'm 30 years older than you. You shouldn't be talking to me that way. They don't say that, but they laugh at me and they do think it's cute. I can tell they think it's cute. But I'm trying. I want to be correct. Yeah. Yeah, it's so silly. You would think that universities won't want people to do short, intensive courses, visa or not. So twitchy. So what I've run into is bureaucracy. So here's the bureaucracy involved. So Yeongnam University is the university in Daegu that offers the intensive 5-day-a-week, 4-hour-a-day Korean classes for foreigners. In order to get a student visa for Yeongnam University in Daegu, the Daegu Foreign Immigration Office cannot for whatever reason process student visas. I have to go to an embassy, a Korean embassy outside of Korea, probably the US, in order to get that visa, apply and receive that visa. And during that time, they hold on to my passport, by the way. But if I wanted to go to a university in Seoul, the Seoul Immigration Office can process student visas. But the Seoul Immigration Office cannot process student visas for me to study at a university in Daegu. They're only allowed to issue student visas for universities in Seoul. Yeah, I don't understand why in a tiny country like Korea, geographically speaking, the immigration office in Seoul is not permitted to issue visas for student visas for universities outside of Seoul, but they're not. And why, therefore, is the Daegu immigration office not equipped to issue student visas at all? No idea. But there it is. It's a weirdness of bureaucracy. But I have been playing the visa game for all kinds of visas for 26 years, 27 years at this point. The first student visa I ever applied for was to study abroad in Spain. Back when you had to go to the embassy in frickin' New York City, and I lived in Delaware. That was a 4.5 hour drive back then. And go and pick it up yourself in person, right? So I've been playing the visa game for a long time, and I've run up against all kinds of red tape in all kinds of countries. So all countries seem to love their red tape, is my experience. I mean, in Germany, it used to be really rough. In Germany, to get a residency permit, you had to have a job. To have a job, you had to have a residency permit. You can see the short circuit there until they finally resolved that issue. So, you know, I've run up against it. You know, my whole adult life, I've been playing the immigration visa game. So it's not a criticism so much as a humorous observation. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I know it is. It is, and you're right, it is silly. It's all silly. In all these countries, it's silly. It's, you know, you would think, well, anyway, that's what it is, and that's why I haven't been able to study at the university and do the intensive course. And the YMCA here used to offer a twice a week, 2 hour a night medium intensive Korean course, and they stopped offering that almost as soon as we moved here. I don't know why. Never found out why. And I'm the kind of person, I don't do well with private lessons. And I'm very picky about the kind of foreign language instruction, and I really want a fully immersive foreign language instruction. I don't want translation. It's not the best way to learn a foreign language. And I really do prefer the group atmosphere because, for one, it's really intense. Private instruction is intense. Having the teacher's attention on you the whole time, whew, that's a bit stressful. So I really do prefer the group environment. So fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. But, you know, I'm after this big medieval living history thing, I'm hoping, I'm hoping to get back to my research, in my more active research into historical Korean clothing after this medieval living history thing in August, because I want to start making these garments these hanbok that I've been researching and visiting at the museums. I think I have a really good idea now about how garments were constructed in 15th and 16th century Joseon and 15th and 16th century Korea. And I'm eager to put it to the test and make myself these garments because, frankly, I want to wear them. I want to wear these beautiful garments. Having gone to these recent exhibits at Dankook University and Chungbuk University, a little bit south of Seoul, and talked to the curators there and looked at these garments in person, I've now got a really good sense for not only how they're made, but how they should look. Because the nice thing about going to these exhibits is that they actually displayed some of the garments on a mannequin form so that I could see how they're supposed to drape. And I could see that despite the fact that these garments in the 15th and 16th century were massive, once they were on a human body, they draped in such a way so as not to look massive, but to drape in elegant folds. So I'm really excited to actually put that to the test and make myself some of these stunning 15th and 16th century garments and 17th century garments. Yeah. Yeah, Twitchy, I agree with you. I'm a proponent of freer movement, especially for students. It is a massive waste of time and resources. It's, countries trying to protect themselves against bad actors. It is what it is, and I can't blame them for that, I guess. Cosmic Sailor, thank you for that lovely comment. Thank you for joining. Did you have any specific questions about Korean history, European history, historical clothing, historical dance, historical music? I'm here for you, my friend. I'm here for you. And for those just joining, welcome to my medieval sewing party. I'm the creative Contessa. Please double tap that screen if you're enjoying. I'm actually sewing a medieval undergarment called a chemise or a chasse in 15th century French, or a smock or a kemza in 14th century English, a smocka in 15th century English. This is the linen undergarment that is worn against the skin under all of the other overgarments. So this is a very important garment. I need this to be done in 2 weeks-ish, more or less. 3 weeks at the latest. Whitney says, it's nice to see you dressed in something other than your normal historical fashion that you wear on this channel. You have such lovely hair. Oh, thank you, Whitney. I'm afraid the algorithm isn't liking the modern clothing as much, but I appreciate the compliment. I actually saw my dentist today and didn't feel like getting all gussied up for the dentist, so you get to see the modern Contessa. You're seeing the travels with the creative Contessa. This is my travel. This is what I wear when I'm out and about and traveling about the world, sort of thing. Oh yeah, my hair's looking particularly nice because it's humid. My people come from moist places in the northern half of Europe, Ireland, England, the Netherlands, Germany, the Czech Republic, Hungary. You see what all these places have in common. And so my hair loves the humidity, for certain. Yeah. Yeah, Twitchy says, bad actors make up such a small amount, and personally, I love meeting people from all over the world, listening to their stories, and experiencing their lives for a brief moment. Twitchy, amen, sister. I agree with you 100%. Bad actors make up such a small percent. And honestly, the reality is that the bad actors really are the ones who are going to find a way to slip through the system anyway. They're the ones who are going to come here on a tourist visa and overstay it. They're the ones who are going to come in and smuggle themselves in on ships. They're the ones who are going to fly under the radar anyway. That is the irony of regulations like that, is that they genuinely only catch people who aren't trying to be a bad actor, who have somehow misunderstood a regulation and get caught, not people who are trying to actually do bad things. Yeah, it's true. You're right. The percentage of immigrants who actually commit crimes is nothing compared to the percentage of citizens who commit crimes. Generally, in most countries, when you start looking at the stats. In fact, immigrants, and I've been an immigrant in a lot of countries, in at least 4 countries at this point, immigrants tend to want to actually behave and abide by the law so that they don't get deported. Yeah, and one of the reasons I love traveling, sort of travels with the Creative Contessa crossover, for those who are interested in travel and seeing other parts of the world and how people live their lives in other parts of the world, I do have a travel channel, Travels with the Creative Contessa. I'm thinking of actually changing it to just Traveling Contessa, and just to shorten it and make it more catchy. Either way, I have a travel channel, lots of very interesting content there. And when I travel to places, and I tend to do live streams and do live stream tours of those places. In fact, I discovered a new neighborhood, a new historical neighborhood here in Daegu with beautiful historical architecture, and I plan on doing a live stream walking tour through it. I haven't scheduled it yet, so I don't know when, but my cats have unfortunately been brigands of late and have been waking me up regularly at 2 and 3 in the morning, and so my sleep has been so horribly interrupted that come the morning when I actually finally get up, I feel like I've just flown over the ocean and I'm jet lagging so badly. So that's why I haven't been doing so many morning live streams lately. It's because I'm waking up feeling like death wormed over, and it usually takes me all day to get to the point where I have the energy for a live stream. Okay, I should actually drink more of this tea. This is the problem with these sewing parties, is I get sewing and I forget to actually drink my tea, and then I get talking and then I forget to drink my tea. Then I get to the end of the sewing party and I have a lot of tea left. Like the tea, it's now what we would call tepid tea. It's cool tea. It's room temperature tea at this point. But I do love the Korean Starbucks specifically because they're actually owned by Shinsegae, and they have therefore localized extremely for Korea. So they have all kinds of Korean baked goods here, baked sweets, fried, steamed things, and they actually have Jeju. HH, you'll love this. Starbucks serves green tea from Jeju Island, and it is some of the best green tea that I've ever had in my life. And I am a tea connoisseur and a tea snob, self-admitted, and the green tea at Starbucks in Korea is some of the best in the world, so highly recommended. Super yummy stuff. James, lovely to see you. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. Uh-oh, I lost my needle. Where is it? There it is. Let me just show you what I'm working on. This is a smock. It's turned inside out right now because I'm finishing the inside seams. Look how the optic white reflects off of my skin. Isn't that fun? Anyway, having a pale complexion, the perks. I am actually felling the seams, as we call this. And you can see that basically encases the entire raw edge of the seam so that it's protected. And when you launder this baby, and this garment will get laundered in a washing machine, when it gets laundered, it will not unravel, right? And some of you have asked me how I launder my medieval undergarments. First thing, before I even turn my linen into an undergarment, I wash it on high heat in a washing machine. I pre-wash it so that it pre-shrinks on high heat. And then that means, because I've already pre-washed it, the temperature at which I washed it before I made it into a garment is the temperature at which I can safely wash it after I make it into a garment. So I have no problem putting these in a washing machine. However, linen is cellulose, and the washing process, the violence of the agitation can, actually eventually deteriorate your fabric by removing fibers from it. So to make your cellulose as strong as possible, any plant fibers, I put my linen garments in the washing machine, I turn it on, and I stop it once it fills up. And then I let it soak overnight so that the linen fibers or the hemp fibers or the Rami fibers, mochi for those who speak Korean fabrics, or cotton. And I let it soak overnight so that the fibers fully hydrate, and cellulose fibers are actually strengthened by being wet. So it makes them stronger, which means when you then put them through the washing machine or the laundering process, whether it's washing machine or not, they resist breaking down much better than they would if you just popped a dry garment into the water and let the cycle run. So let your linen garments fully hydrate before you before you let the machine actually run. So like I said, I just let the machine fill up, keep an eye on it, set a timer maybe, let it fill up, then I press pause and I just leave it and walk away. Come back the next day, let it finish running. This also helps break down more of those stains and those oils and loosen the dirt that has built up from rubbing against your skin. So another benefit of that. But that's how I wash them. I do tend to wash them on delicate unless they're really soiled. I do tend to wash them on delicate to, again, minimize the amount of agitation to which they're being subjected. But sometimes they get soiled enough from the oils on your skin that trap the pollution and the dirt from the air. And then that gets rubbed into the collars, especially the collars and cuffs. So if it's particularly soiled, I will go ahead and wash it on the regular cycle rather than the delicate cycle, because admittedly things do get cleaner if you wash them on the full cycle versus the delicate cycle. But that's how I do it. I do not hand wash them. And let me tell you something. Hand washing in the Middle Ages was a rough process. Now we view hand washing as a by name for the most delicate cycle of your washing machine. Not in the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, hand washing would have been a violent, total body workout process in which the fabric would have been beaten and stirred and slapped and stretched and boiled. It was, hand washing, and rubbed on a board in some cases. It would not a delicate process in the Middle Ages. So I think it is funny that now we think of hand washing as being oh so delicate and dainty. Coddling our fabric, and medieval laundresses did not coddle the fabric at all, or at least not the linen things. Stupid. Okay, I apologize again. The live stream has decided, the live chat has decided to pause itself. I am sorry, everyone. Okay, well, I'm coming to the end of this scene. What did I do? It only went down from there. Yeah, coming to the end of this scene. So does anyone have any plans to attend any historical festivities? HH, do you have any, I know you're down in Jeju, are there any historic, I know in Jeju City, there is a historic complex. There's the shrine, maybe the Governor's Palace. I think it's the Governor's Palace, right? The Governor's Palace in Jeju City is a historic complex, a historic Hanok Korean architecture complex. Are there any sorts of historic festivals being hosted at all in Jeju that involve, historical reenactors wearing Joseon-style clothing, changing of the guards, that kind of thing? Any sort of festivals that might be of interest for me particularly to attend and wear some of my historical hanbok to? I know most people think of Jeju as the place to ride your bike, go to the beach, go hiking, climb the volcano at the center of the island. But I am also interested in the cultural side of Jeju. I do enjoy all those things as well, of course, especially Jeju beaches. Oh, Jeju beaches, guys, if you haven't been to Jeju Island, you need to go. Their beaches are magical, like white sand, crystal clear blue water, so gorgeous. And they've got dolphins that'll just spring out of the water. Oh, so beautiful. Cetaceans frolicking in the surf. Beautiful, massive volcano at the center of the island, dominating the landscape everywhere. Of course, the one thing, I will tell you, Jeju needs a train. It needs a circum. Let me see, I'm trying to think of what this would be. Basically, a train that runs around the island, right? That runs around the periphery of the island. I just, the buses, it's nice they have that bus system, but I would be much happier if it were trains instead of buses. Much smoother experience. Korean bus drivers drive like Grand Theft Auto. They really do. They drive like they just stole the bus. And they're dodging the authorities. Oh my goodness. Okay, almost done here. By the way, everyone, how is the noise level? Is the noise level too high? The ambient noise? Is the ambient noise? Seems to me. It seems. Oh. Welcome back. I don't know how long we were gone. I just now saw a notification that said, welcome, you're live, which, yeah, minute 50 at an hour 50, YouTube always recycles. So I'm sorry, apologize for that, everyone. But if you've been enjoying this, don't forget to double tap that screen, everyone. Okay. Any final questions about what I'm doing, about medieval material culture, about any of my historical research recently? Medieval myths maybe you'd like busted. I'm going to open up the floor for any final comments or questions. I would like to thank you all for joining me today. I'd like to thank my patrons on Patreon and my channel members and my Facebook subscribers for financially supporting my work. Twitchy, you're out there. Appreciate you massively, my dear. Looking forward to finally meeting you in person this early autumn. And I'd like to invite you, if you would like to access a host of extra benefits, extra resources, extra material, extra videos, extra footage, my Creative Contessa Discord, and the occasional Zoom party where it's just us, not live streaming, actually interacting face to face, then consider becoming a patron on Patreon, a channel member, or a subscriber. Patrons probably have access to the most extra content, followed by channel members, and then Facebook subscribers. Yep, time to start packing. So yeah, if you had any questions and I didn't answer them because the live chat was acting real funny today, if you pop them in the comments when the video posts, then I will see them and I will respond as long as I see they're there. And if you can take the time once the video posts to just leave an emoji, just a little comment under the video, that helps with the algorithm. You know the game, guys. Otherwise, thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, may your adventures in history be creative. Bye, everyone.